AYANEO has long been the top dog when it comes to premium handheld Windows gaming devices. I've actually been lucky enough to gather a bit of a collection of their stuff over the last few years, and while the overall approach of the AYANEO product line has remained mostly the same, they've been slowly chipping away at meaningful improvements to their line of devices. The AYANEO Air was my first entry point into their world, and even my first time using a handheld gaming PC. It was very cool for what it was, but I was a bit disappointed with the lack of power for AAA gaming and not the most comfortable controls, as well as just completely abysmal battery life at the time. Since then, every device that I've gotten my hands on from AYANEO has seen major improvements. But the design of their Windows gaming handhelds and the ones from other competitors are just about the same. We get a few interesting concepts from time to time, like the Legion Go's detachable controllers and its FPS mouse mode, but for the most part, they're mostly these candy bar style gaming consoles. But now we've got something cool, new, and exciting. The AYANEO Slide. Its main attraction is that hidden under the screen is a full keyboard. I think there's a chance that this feature could make Windows handheld gaming a whole lot more acceptable because you've got that keyboard at your disposal. Unboxing the AYANEO Slide is just pure enjoyment. If there's one thing AYANEO hasn't changed, for the better, it's how premium their unboxing experience is. As a backer on Indiegogo, you always get some fun goodies, and the Slide is no exception. We've got AYANEO stickers, a mousepad, a carrying case, and even some pretty high quality enamel pins. For some reason, the style of the box AYANEO went with is like a VHS tape, and even though it makes kind of no sense at all, it's just so fun and impressive the time that they've put into the unboxing experience. It's thoughtful in being fun to open, but also always includes some handy accessories like USB-A to USB-C converters, a power adapter for different countries, and USB-C charging cable. The device is obviously the star of the show though. It's got quite a bit of heft to it, surprisingly, and it's actually a little bit thicker than I was expecting. But I do really like the white shell with the orange accents. Coming from spending a lot of time with the OLED Steam Deck, I'm really digging the orange accents carrying through onto the Slide as well. For the AYANEO Slide's controller, we've got Hall sensing analog sticks that feel pretty good. They're similar to the AYANEO Air line of devices, so while you don't have a massive range of motion, it does feel like there's enough movement for nuanced controls. The ABXY buttons feel great to use. Previous AYANEO devices have a bit of a clunk feel to their buttons, but these rubber membranes feel nice and smooth. I'm not usually a fan of AYANEO's D-pads, but for the Slide, it feels like there's been a massive improvement here, and the D-pad is super comfortable. At the bottom left of the device is where we'll find our start and select buttons. The right side of the device is where we'll find an AYANEO quick button and a show desktop button. At the top of the device, we've got our triggers. This is AYANEO's first time using full Hall sensing analog triggers, and they are perhaps the smoothest triggers I've ever experienced. Also at the top is our volume rocker, USB-C charging port, 2 macro buttons, and a power button that doubles as a fingerprint sensor. The fingerprint sensor is probably one of the fastest fingerprint scanners I've ever experienced too. It's nearly instant. You barely have to tap on it and it still just works, which is awesome. At the bottom of the AYANEO Slide is our second USB-C port and a microSD card. One thing notably missing from this device though is a headphone jack. The bottom of the device is also where we'll find the speakers. One of my biggest disappointments with AYANEO is sound quality though. Their devices just never sound great. They always sound a little bit tinny. Unfortunately, we don't see any improvements here. There are apps that you can use to tweak the soundscape a bit, but I'd really like to see AYANEO just spend a little bit more time making the speakers sound a little bit better, and maybe not make them downfiring. Spec-wise, the AYANEO Slide configurations all include an AMD 7840U chipset, a 46.2 watt-hour battery, Wi-Fi 6E, Bluetooth 5.2, and a 6-inch 1080p IPS touchscreen. Storage options range from 512GB to a whopping 4TB. The RAM starts at 16GB and goes all the way to 64GB. These crazy specs obviously come with increased price points. The base model, which is the 16GB of RAM and 512GB of storage, will retail for $899. These prices go all the way up to $1,600 for the 64GB of RAM, 4TB of storage model. The early bird pricing for the AYANEO Slide actually came in at $699 for the base model. This puts it completely in line with some of its competitors like the Asus ROG Ally and the Lenovo Legion Go. While it won't be that price for long, it's certainly giving us a ton more value than what it will retail for. With specs out of the way though, we have to look at the slide up keyboard. The sliding motion is easy to flip up while you're holding the device. It's got a nice thunk to it to let you know that it's fully locked in. And you can even angle the screen once it's fully slid out. I can't help but think of the T-Mobile Sidekick here. I never had one, but man, this would be the coolest sidekick ever. The angle of the screen can be adjusted to be between 10 degrees and 30 degrees. While it's not a huge range of adjustment, this has such a profound effect on ergonomics. You don't have to kind of contort your wrists so the screen faces you. Now you just tilt the screen a little bit and you can keep gaming comfortably. The keyboard itself is obviously pretty small. I wouldn't imagine you'll be doing actual gaming on the keyboard, but this opens up the ability for such an easier time navigating through windows, or even playing some games that might require keyboard input from time to time. The only thing that I don't love about the slide-up keyboard though is the actual touchscreen experience. Since the screen sits on a mechanism, when you tap the screen, it kind of clicks against the keyboard behind it. It's not a deal breaker by any means, but it's a little bit off-putting because you do get this clicking noise as you use the touchscreen. First time setup on these devices are always a pain, even from big brands like Asus and Lenovo. But for the first time, probably ever, I was able to easily set up Windows without much hassle because of that built-in keyboard. Setup is still a pain though because it is Windows after all, and the built-in keyboard doesn't protect you from things like Microsoft upselling Office and OneDrive on your gaming handheld, but really, it's just way more seamless than ever before. After the initial setup, you still need to do the Windows things like remove the bloatware, change the touch keyboard settings, turn off auto rotate, but at least the AYANEO Spaces app tries to help you along. Granted, it actually didn't work super well for me. It tries to auto-install your game launchers, but they all failed to download. But the point is that they tried, and I think that they're actually making some pretty massive improvements to the AYA Spaces experience. The AYA Spaces app still does have some quirks, but it's improved where it matters most. The AYA Spaces app is now fast, snappy, and has everything you need in the launcher. I also noticed that it's set to boot so quickly on startup that you barely even see the Windows desktop, if at all. But there are some quirks that I just can't ignore, and I have to complain about them at least a little bit. My biggest gripe comes from the second you open up the app. You get this poorly worded, poorly designed pop-up that I think basically says, do you want the AYA Space to launch in full screen or minimized? The settings in the Spaces app are also sometimes pretty unclear. I don't know what Motion X is, I'm guessing it's maybe something with gyroscope support, but still it needs extra software installed and I just didn't want to deal with that. The keyboard RGB selections don't seem to match what colors the RGB actually turns to, and changing the RGB on the analog sticks is impossible to find on the settings. It's also too bad that you don't have a ton of control over the RGB itself and there's only these preset colors, so I couldn't really get the analog sticks to match the orange accents on the actual device. But I will say that behind those issues is a snappy front end that automatically populates your game library from a variety of launchers pretty seamlessly. Another standout feature on AYANEO devices is the quick menu. It's insanely robust and easy to change settings on the fly. Spaces even has its own performance overlay, so you don't need to install another dependency like Afterburner if you don't want to. I will say that there is some standard Windows jankiness on the slide that I haven't quite been able to overcome though. For some reason, the slide doesn't have a sleep mode. It has a hibernate mode, but you seemingly can't use standby mode on the slide, and I can't figure out why. Another issue that I have on the slide is actually shutting down the device. I find that it consistently just hangs on the shutting down spinner, and I have to force the shutdown by holding the power button. I'm hoping that these are just BIOS or firmware updates that AYANEO can fix eventually, because they're just minor, but they do make it a little bit janky. When it comes to game performance, we do have a pretty good sense of what we can expect out of the 7840U chipset, and the slide is no slouch here. With a max TDP of 28 watts, we can really push this device. Cyberpunk's benchmark test does pretty well, averaging 40 FPS on the Steam Deck preset with AMD FSR 2.1 at 1080p. After some tweaking, Palworld runs really well. Resident Evil 4 Remake is a game that I've been testing on most of these handheld gaming PCs and has great performance on the Slide as well. I've been on a real Grand Theft Auto kick since the GTA 6 trailer, and replaying GTA 5 is fantastic on the Slide. For less demanding games, I recently got addicted to Cult of the Lamb, and I've played through practically the whole game on the Slide. I know, I'm a bit late to finally playing it, but man, am I glad that I finally got around to it now, and it's a ton of fun to experience on the Slide. Cult of the Lamb looks and feels great, and has the benefit of being a little bit easier on the battery compared to those other games that we've looked at. With each of these games, you're always going to have to think about the performance versus battery life ratio. One thing that will help you through this though is the Smart TDP option from AYANEO. This feature will work to automatically adjust the TDP to hit a target frames per second, so you can make sure that you aren't constantly messing with the TDP draw yourself. In the IA Spaces overlay, there's a toggle for Smart TDP. Once you turn this feature on, it will give you a pop-up giving you some more info to make sure you aren't just always running your device at the full 28 watts. The 7840U chipset can also really pack a punch with emulation performance. The classic systems are perfect here and are a great option for some battery-saving gaming. Widescreen Super Nintendo looks great on the Slide. Upscaling GameCube is awesome, even at lower TDPs. PlayStation 2 runs great. Wii U is excellent, especially once you bump up the TDP a bit. Even PlayStation 3 is playable, at least to a certain extent. Not every game will run and you'll have to check compatibility, but I was able to get Little Big Planet running pretty well. Xbox 360 requires quite a lot of power draw, but if you're willing to sacrifice some battery time, you can get some 360 games up and running too. Switch is also definitely playable on the Slide. Since you can choose between handheld and docked mode, if you don't mind running the games at 720p, you can run Switch at a lower TDP and still get some pretty good performance. The AYANEO Slide is all of the features and hardware design that has made AYANEO devices the most premium handheld gaming solution. With the addition of the slide-up keyboard, I think that we have a unique device in the AYANEO lineup with not that many drawbacks. Sure, the Slide is pretty thick and it's a little heavy compared to other options, but the slide-up keyboard and the angled display give you a Windows gaming experience much less compromised than competition out there. The 6-inch screen can be on the smaller side, but I think it's a worthwhile compromise for the Slide to not have a massive footprint. The AYANEO Slide's controls are some of the best that I've experienced with their devices. For what it is, you get some pretty insane power from the Slide with its ability to play tons of AAA games and get some great emulation performance from it. The Slide may not be perfect, but we're getting so close to perfection. The price is obviously the biggest factor here. The Indiegogo backer price is really enticing, but while I'm making this video, that intro price is only good for another 20 units before it's sold out. That means that we're really looking at $900 for the cheapest model, and that's a super hefty price tag. I think that AYANEO has created something awesome, and I'm glad to have been able to be a backer for that intro price. If this had a cheaper price tag, it would be a much easier recommendation. But for now, it's some cool tech that we can hope will continue to see refinements and maybe even a price reduction over time. But those are just my thoughts and opinions. What do you think about the AYANEO Slide? Do you think there's too many AYANEO devices? Is this maybe the exact device that you've been waiting for? Or are you more drawn to things like the ROG Ally, the Legion Go, or the Steam Deck? Let me know your thoughts down in the comments. Also, be sure to check me out on Twitch, where I do lots of unboxings and first impressions of these kind of devices. Make sure you're subscribed so you don't miss future reviews, and thanks for watching.